Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the Online Safety Amendment Social Media Minimum Age Bill 2024, and it is a great pleasure for me to do so. Just at the outset, Deputy Speaker, I think it's important to start with how we have landed here. And we have landed here because we have had social media now in some form for around about 20 years. And we have given social media platforms the opportunity, and this has been successive governments, to self-regulate. They have failed to do so. And, Deputy Speaker, I heard the Honourable Member for New England. He drew the comparison with the gun legislation that was rightfully brought in by the Howard government and really led by former Prime Minister Howard, and that after the dreadful massacre in Port Arthur, and that was nation-changing and changed the way that we as a country looked at possession of guns, and that was the right decision for our nation. The social media platforms, Deputy Speaker, have proven to be completely recalcitrant in this. 4 decades ago, when we didn't have seatbelts in cars, the legislators of those days had a similar problem with car manufacturers who said, oh, it'll be too expensive to put seatbelts into cars. It is not really that much of an issue. People are dying from other injuries, not just from not wearing seatbelts. It's too hard to regulate. It's going to make cars too expensive. Well, Deputy Speaker, thankfully, the parliaments of those times had the courage to stand up to the car manufacturers and say no, because in the national interest we must prevent people from dying from chest injuries or being rendered permanently paraplegic or quadriplegic through those injuries in car accidents. And, Deputy Speaker, we regulated it. The sky didn't fall down, the sky didn't fall in, and now our cars are safer than they've ever been, and indeed cars are now sold on the basis of safety features. So, Deputy Speaker, this is legislation that is completely necessary for us to change the course for our young people. This legislation broadly aims to set a minimum age of 16 for Australians to hold social media accounts. It requires age-restricted social media companies to take reasonable steps to prevent age-restricted users from having an account with the social media platform. And the entire objective of this legislation is to reduce the harm that social media is causing to young people. Deputy Speaker, when we hear reports of 11 and 12-year-olds taking their own lives because of bullying or because of some of the material that they are being subject to on social media, it is time that we said, we as the adults in this place, we as the legislators, as federal legislators, we must say no. We must stand up for our children. We cannot allow what has been allowed to occur, what the social media platforms have allowed onto their sites, to continue. And this is, at the first breath, about protecting our children going forward. And secondly, this empowers parents, Deputy Speaker, because I know as a parent the hardest word to say to your children is no, but it is also, when it is the hardest to say, that is also the time when it is the most necessary to say it. And some of the arguments that have been put up against this legislation to me simply don't make sense. And I say this particularly, I was here for the member for McKellar, and I have a lot of respect for the honourable member, but a couple of the arguments that have come about have been around children with disabilities, or we are cutting off vulnerable youths from supports that are only on social media. Well, Deputy Speaker, don't we then have to change it so that those supports are available in other forums? This is not a ban on the internet. This is a ban on social media platforms for children under the age of 16, because they are children. And we have various other laws for our children. We say to them, you cannot drive a car under the age of 16 because we know that that is too dangerous. We say you cannot smoke cigarettes. We say you cannot drink alcohol. We say you should not be having sex under the age of 16. And these laws have all come in place over a period of time where our society has come to a point where it has been necessary to bring in prohibitions. And I am not usually a person who wants prohibitions brought in, Deputy Speaker, but they must be brought in when the harm, the activity that is to be prohibited, the danger of prohibition is far less than the danger that the activity is currently causing. Because I can't recall at the age of 11 or 12 knowing what suicide was. And the fact now that not only do Australian 11 and 12-year-old boys and girls know what suicide is, but they know how to take their own life, and they are taking their own life, this is an absolute tragedy. And we are in a place now where we can do something to prevent it, and so we need to do something to prevent it. We are not the argument that, well, some kids are still going to get onto social media. Okay, but why are we making the good the enemy of the perfect in this? Some kids under the age of 16 still drive cars. Some kids under the age of 18, some kids under the age of 18 still drink alcohol, they still smoke cigarettes, they still do things that we do not want them to do. But it gives parents, this legislation gives parents back control. They can say, no, you cannot be on this. You can't be on Instagram, you can't be on Snapchat because it is against the law. And Deputy Speaker, my boys now are 18, and I just wish that this law had been in place when my husband and I were grappling with this when ours were younger. We tried everything to keep them off social media, but parents these days, parents are working, kids come home, they're on their phones, and parents cannot be sitting there with their children 24 hours a day looking at what they are watching, and indeed they shouldn't be. So this gives parents the ability to say no. And I think the other argument that I just cannot accept is the argument that, oh, but what about the current 13 and 14-year-olds that are on social media? Oh, we're going to have to now say to them, you have to come off it. Yes, that's exactly right. We're the adults, we're the parents. Yes, 14-year-old, it's now the law, you have to come off it. And then they can go and they can whinge, and they can whinge to all of their friends because, Deputy Speaker, this is a time when parents have to have the ability to be able to unite together and say, no, we are all as a wall here saying no. That's what it gives parents. It gives parents back control, and it gives parents the ability to not be the only parent in the group that says, no, you cannot be on social media. That's what this is important. I note that there have been And if we just go back to how we got to this place, I want to commend the member for Banks, the Shadow Minister for Communications on this. He introduced, Deputy Speaker, a private member's bill back in November of last year, and it's now up for its 12-month anniversary, and I'm very glad to see that the government, the Communications Minister, has, after 12 months, decided to now come on board with a policy and legislation that initially originated from the Liberal Party, and particularly from the Shadow Minister for Communications, the member for Banks. And while we are there, the other members on my side who have been instrumental in getting the legislation to the place where it is today, the member for Flinders and also the member for Fisher, both of whom have been tireless advocates in this place to reduce the harm of social media on our children. So, Deputy Speaker, I thank all of those members. I've been inundated from my electorate by emails about this issue. Parents are crying out for assistance with this. They know, I mean, most times in your life when things go really pear-shaped, you can usually trace it back to when you haven't gone with your instinct. And parents have the correct instinct on this. They know that their kids are seeing things on social media, are being subject to bullying, they're being subject to various sites and other graphics that they know they do not want their children to see. And in the normal course, for example, back before social media, before the internet, very few children under the age of 18 were viewing pornography. There were a few, there always are, but it is very different to what is now available these days. And I mean, I hate to think what my kids have seen on social media. I really do, Deputy Speaker. And that is not good, because it is bad for both young boys and also for young girls. It is saying to young girls, you have to look this certain way, you have to perform this certain way. And it is similarly saying to young men, you have to perform this certain way, and by the way, it is okay to treat girls in this way. So, Deputy Speaker, and a lot of that is being circulated through social media. One of the other issues that I know that a lot of us have grappled with is about the protection of privacy. And it is very pleasing to see that the government has agreed to amend the legislation to include a clear provision stating that a person cannot be compelled to provide digital ID or other personal identity documents such as passports. And I know this is a big issue for some of my coalition members, particularly in the other place. It also prohibits platforms from using information collected for age assurance purposes for any other purpose unless explicitly agreed to by the individual. So what this means, Deputy Speaker, is that once information has been used for age assurance, it must be destroyed unless the individual agrees to it being retained. So, Deputy Speaker, I am quite comfortable with those privacy amendments, that this does provide adequate privacy and does address the concerns that have been raised by some of my colleagues here and also in the other place. So, to conclude, Deputy Speaker, this is good legislation. This is legislation that has been well thought through, and again, I do thank the government for coming on board with the initiative that was originally proposed by the member for Banks, and I commend the bill to the House, Deputy Speaker, for all of the reasons I've outlined. Thank you.
Authorised anywhere, Liberal Party, Sutherland.